I was gone for 3 days. That's all. 72 hours to drive down to Macon, Georgia, to say goodbye to my oldest friend in the world, a man named Ed, who had been like a brother to me since we were 19 years old, and working the same shift at a paper mill in rural Ohio. Ed had passed from a stroke on a Tuesday morning, quietly, in his sleep, the way you hope to go but never really expect to. His wife called me herself. She said, "He would have wanted you there, Robert." And so I went. I told my son before I left. I told my daughter-in-law. I stood in my own kitchen on a Wednesday afternoon, travel bag over my shoulder, and said I'd be back by Saturday evening at the latest. My son nodded and said, "Drive safe, Dad." My daughter-in-law smiled and said they'd keep an eye on the house. I thanked them. I actually thanked them. I should have known something was wrong when my daughter-in-law smiled like that. My name is Robert. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a high school history teacher in Dayton, Ohio, and I retired 2 years ago with a decent pension, a modest house I've owned since 1987, and a workshop in my garage that I built with my own 2 hands. That workshop is the thing I want to tell you about. It matters more than you might think right now. After my wife, Carol, passed away from cancer 4 years ago, that workshop became my sanctuary. I started woodworking seriously about 6 months after her funeral, when I realized that grief sits differently in your hands than it does in your chest, and that making something out of raw wood was the only thing that kept me from sitting in her empty chair every night until I fell asleep. I built bookshelves. I built a rocking chair that I put on the front porch. I built a dining table that I gave to my neighbor Diane when she moved into her new apartment. I wasn't a professional. I wasn't even particularly skilled at first. But that workshop was mine. And everything in it, the lathe, the router, the hand planes hanging on the pegboard in order of size, the smell of sawdust and linseed oil, all of it was Carol's memory pressed into something I could still touch. My son moved in about 18 months ago. He was 34 at the time. He and his wife had been renting an apartment on the east side of Dayton, and he came to me in October and said they were having some financial trouble. He'd been laid off from his logistics job in September and was between things. His wife was working part-time as a medical receptionist while finishing an online certificate program. He asked if they could stay for a few months, just until he found something new. Maybe 3 months. 4 at the outside. I said yes. Of course I said yes. He's my son. He grew up in that house. I still had his old bedroom with the same window that rattles when the wind comes from the north. 3 months became 6. 6 became 12. By the time I drove down to Macon for Ed's funeral, they had been living in my house for a year and a half. And I want to be honest with you, I had been paying for most of the groceries, both utility bills and the internet. My son had found a part-time delivery job in the spring, but it didn't cover much. His wife had finished her certificate, but hadn't found a full-time position yet, or so she told me. They were always just about to get back on their feet. There was always 1 more month around the corner. I had been patient because he is my son, and because Carol would have wanted me to be patient, and because I told myself every morning that this was what you did for family. You showed up. You held the door open. You gave people time. But I want you to understand something about my workshop. It was the one place in that house that was completely, unambiguously, unmistakably mine. I had a conversation with my son early on. Within the first week of them moving in, I sat him down at the kitchen table and I said, "You're welcome here, and I want you to feel at home. But the workshop is off limits to storage, and I don't want it used for anything other than what it's for." He nodded. He said, "Of course, Dad. Absolutely." His wife was there too. She nodded along. I went to Ed's funeral on a Thursday morning. It was a small service, just family and a few old friends, in a Baptist church outside the city. I sat in the second pew and held Ed's wife's hand and thought about the summer of 1980, when Ed and I drove his pickup truck all the way to the Florida Keys on nothing but a credit card and a cooler full of gas station sandwiches. I thought about the way he laughed, which was loud enough that people in restaurants sometimes turned around. I cried a little. Not a lot. Enough. I stayed through Friday to help with some of the arrangements and to have dinner with Ed's family. I drove back north on Saturday, took the long way through the hills, stopped for coffee at a diner in Kentucky, the way I used to do when Carol was alive, and we'd make that same drive together. I wasn't in a hurry. It was my house. It would be there when I got back. I pulled into the driveway at around 5:30 in the evening. The garage door was closed, which was unusual. I usually left it cracked because of the ventilation for the wood stain I'd been using. I parked on the street and walked to the front door and let myself in. My son was on the couch watching something on television. His wife came out of the kitchen with a dish towel over her shoulder, and she had that look on her face, the one I'd seen before when she was about to manage a situation rather than address it. "How was the drive?" my son asked. "Fine," I said. I put my bag down. "What happened to the garage?" There was a pause. The kind of pause that has a whole conversation inside it. "We've been meaning to talk to you about that," my daughter-in-law said. I walked past her without another word and went through the kitchen and out the door that connects to the garage. I stood in the doorway for a long moment. My workbench was pushed against the far wall, buried under moving boxes. The lathe was in the corner with a bedsheet thrown over it. My hand planes, the ones I'd arranged on the pegboard in the order that Carol had helped me label when I first put them up, were gone from the wall entirely. In their place was a white shelf unit from a big box store, still with the sticker on the side. The pegboard itself had been painted over. Painted. Light yellow. In the center of the room, where I used to stand and work, there was a crib. A white crib with little wooden animals along the top rail. Next to it was a changing table and a rocking chair. That was not the one I built, it was new. Pale wood, ordered from somewhere online by the look of it. I heard my son come in behind me. "She's pregnant," he said. I didn't turn around. "I know she's pregnant. She told me in February. My daughter-in-law was 4 months along. I knew. I had congratulated them. I had meant it. We needed to set up the nursery," he said. "The second bedroom is too small for everything, and we figured—" "You figured," I said. "Dad, where are my planes?" There was a pause. "In the storage unit down the road. We got you a storage unit. We're paying for it." I turned around then. My son was standing in the doorway, hands in his pockets, with the expression he used to have when he was 16 and had done something he knew was wrong but was hoping I would talk myself out of being angry about it. His wife was behind him, one hand resting on her stomach. "I told you the workshop was not to be touched," I said. I kept my voice level. I'd spent 31 years talking to rooms full of teenagers. I knew how to be calm when I didn't feel calm. "We're having a baby," my daughter-in-law said. And there was an edge in it. The kind that means she had already prepared for this conversation and decided that it ended with her being right. "I'm aware," I said. "And I told you both clearly, when you moved in, that this space was not available. You made a decision about my property without consulting me while I was away burying my best friend." My son said something about how they'd tried to find another option and there wasn't one, and my daughter-in-law said something about how it was just storage and wood and I could always get a new workbench, and I stood there and I listened to all of it, and when they finished, I looked at them both and I said, "I'm going for a walk. We'll talk when I get back." I walked around the block twice. It was October, the same kind of cold that gets into your collar and stays there. I thought about Ed, about the way he used to give advice by asking questions instead of answering them directly. I thought about what Carol would have said, because she was always sharper than me about people and their motives. I thought about the past 18 months, and I started doing a kind of accounting in my head. The way you do, when the number you've been avoiding finally becomes impossible to ignore. My son had been living in my house for 18 months. He and his wife paid no rent. I'd asked them once, gently, about contributing to utilities, and my daughter-in-law had brought up all the things they were managing: the job search, the certificate program, the stress of the transition, and I had dropped it. I was paying somewhere between $800 and $1,000 a month in increased utility and grocery costs, by my rough estimate. That was somewhere close to $15,000 over the course of their stay. And in all that time, I had never once seen either of them sit down with a budget or talk concretely about when they might move out, or offer a specific plan with a specific date. And now they had decided, while I was at a funeral, to take the one space in the house that I had explicitly protected and convert it into a nursery without asking me. When I came back inside, I sat down at the kitchen table and asked them to sit across from me. I said, I need to understand the plan, not a general idea. A plan. When are you moving out? And where are you going? My son started to say something about the baby coming in June and wanting to be settled before then, and I said, that's not a plan. That's a reason to delay making a plan. My daughter-in-law said they'd been looking at places, but the market was expensive. I said, how much have you saved? Another pause. Longer this time. We've been trying to build that back up, my son said. You've been here 18 months, I said. You have no rent, no utilities, minimal groceries. Where has the money gone? I want to be clear. I was not yelling. I was asking. The same way I used to ask a student who hadn't done the reading to walk me through what they had and hadn't understood. Patient. Specific. Waiting. My daughter-in-law said they had some credit card debt they'd been paying down. My son mentioned some car repairs. There were medical bills from early in the year. It added up, he said. It always added up. I nodded. I said, okay. I need you to give me a move-out date, not a range. A date. The look they exchanged in that moment told me something I hadn't fully admitted to myself before. It wasn't the look of people who were embarrassed about being behind. It was the look of people who had not seriously expected this conversation to happen. I said, I'm going to call my attorney on Monday. I'm going to discuss the process of formally notifying you as tenants of a move-out date, because I want to do this properly and with enough notice to be fair. You'll have 60 days. That takes us to mid-December, which gives you time before the holidays and before the baby comes in June. My daughter-in-law said, you're serious. I'm serious, I said. My son looked at me like he was waiting for me to take it back. I didn't take it back. I got up, made myself a sandwich, and went to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the photo of Carol on the nightstand, and I thought about her for a long time. Carol had a word for the feeling you get when you've been too kind for too long, and the kindness has curdled into something neither party respects. She called it courtesy debt. She said, Robert, you can't keep lending yourself out and then wonder why you feel bankrupt. She was right about most things. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking about my hand planes in a storage unit somewhere, and the smell of yellow paint over my pegboard, and the way my son had stood in that doorway with his hands in his pockets. But by 3 a.m, I had arrived at a kind of clarity, the way you do when you've stopped trying to feel better about something, and just let yourself feel what it actually is. On Sunday morning, I drove to the storage unit they'd rented. It was one of those places off the highway with orange doors and bad lighting. My name wasn't on the unit. My son had rented it in his own name, which I noted. Inside, my workbench tools were stacked in plastic bins, not carefully. My hand planes were wrapped in newspaper, which at least showed some consideration. But 3 of them were in a box together without padding between them. The router was just sitting loose on the floor of a bin, the cord wrapped around it. My woodstock 2 years of collected walnut and cherry and maple, some of it seasoned for over a year, was stacked against the wall. Some of the thinner pieces had already started to warp from the temperature change. I took a photograph of everything. I don't know exactly why. Something in me said, document this. That afternoon I called my attorney, a woman named Margaret who had handled my estate paperwork after Carol died. I explained the situation. She walked me through the formal notice process, which in Ohio meant a written 30-day notice for month-to-month tenants I'd never charged rent, which complicated things slightly, but she said we could move forward clearly. She also mentioned, almost in passing, that I should consider reviewing my estate documents while we were at it, since having family members living in your home for an extended period sometimes created assumptions, legal and otherwise, that were worth clarifying. I thanked her and said I'd come in later that week. On Monday evening, after my son came home from his delivery shift, I gave him the written notice. I had printed it out, signed it, and put the date on it. He read it twice. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Dad, she's pregnant." "I know," I said. 60 days is enough time to find a place and get settled before June. I'll help you with the first and last month's deposit." His wife came in from the other room. She had clearly been listening. She said, "So that's it? After everything we've done for you, you're just throwing us out?" I looked at her. I said, very carefully, "What is it that you've done for me?" She said they had been there. They had been present. They had taken care of the house. I said, "You converted my workshop without permission while I was at a funeral. I've covered nearly all of the household expenses for 18 months. I've never once asked for rent. I would like to know, specifically, what you've done for me." She didn't have an answer for that. She had the expression of a person who is used to winning arguments by making the other party feel guilty, and who has just discovered that the other party has run out of guilt. I went to see Margaret on Wednesday. We updated my will, which had not been changed since Carol died. I removed a general-purpose provision that had left a significant portion of the estate to my son without conditions, and replaced it with a structured arrangement that included specific benchmarks and a charitable remainder to a woodworking education program at the local community college that Carol used to support. I also put the house into a revocable living trust, which Margaret had been recommending for 2 years, and I'd been putting off. It felt less like punishment and more like housekeeping. Long overdue housekeeping. The 60 days were not easy. There was a period of about 2 weeks where my son barely spoke to me, and his wife spoke to me only in single sentences about logistics. There was a night in early November when I could hear them arguing in their room, and I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and stared at the wall and wondered if I was being hard-hearted. I am not a man who finds it easy to hold a position when the people around him are unhappy. It took Carol a long time to teach me that the discomfort of the people who've taken advantage of you is not your responsibility to relieve. But there was also a moment, maybe 3 weeks in, that I want to tell you about. I had started moving my tools back from the storage unit in small loads, keeping them in the house until the garage was available again. One evening I was at the kitchen table, cleaning one of the hand planes, the number 4 smoothing plane that I'd bought secondhand and restored myself, which was one of the things I was most proud of, and my son came in and sat down across from me. He didn't say anything for a while. He just watched. Then he said, "I didn't know Mom helped you label those." I looked up. "Label what?" "The planes. The pegboard. You told me once that she did the labels in her handwriting." I set the plane down. I said, "She did. Little strips of painter's tape with the names written in her handwriting. She thought I'd keep rearranging them and lose track otherwise." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I didn't think about that when we painted over the board." I didn't say anything. He said, "I'm sorry about that, Dad. Specifically about that." I nodded. I appreciated the specificity. It takes more honesty to apologize for something particular than to issue a general one, I said. "Apology accepted. For that specific thing." He almost smiled. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was something. They moved out on the second Saturday of December. It was cold, a real Ohio cold with a gray sky that sat low over everything. I helped them carry boxes to the moving truck they'd rented. They'd found a 2-bedroom apartment about 15 minutes away. A decent place. Affordable. I had given them the deposit money as I'd promised. My son shook my hand at the end of it, which was a more formal gesture than we usually exchanged, but I understood what it meant. His wife said goodbye with a nod. We were not warm yet. I didn't expect warmth yet. What I expected, and what I intended to give in return, was honesty going forward. That seemed like enough of a foundation. After the truck pulled out, I stood in the driveway for a while in my coat. The maple out front had lost most of its leaves, and the ones that remained were the dark, stubborn kind that stay through the first frost. I looked at the house. The house I bought for $37,000 in 1987. The house where my son was born, where Carol made Christmas morning feel like a small, personal miracle every single year, and I felt something settle in me that I hadn't realized had been unsettled. I went inside. I made a pot of coffee, I took it out to the garage. The crib and the changing table were gone. They'd taken all of it, which I was relieved about. The yellow paint was still on the pegboard, which was going to take some work, but the room was empty and smelled like cardboard, and the faint memory of sawdust underneath everything. I walked to the window where the afternoon light came in at an angle and hit the workbench surface just right. Carol used to say the light in that garage was the best light in the house, which I always thought was a kind thing to say about a garage. I started bringing my tools back in that afternoon. I didn't try to set everything up at once. I just arranged things where they belonged and let the room start to become itself again. The hand planes went on the workbench temporarily while I figured out the pegboard situation. The lathe went back in its corner. I swept the floor twice. By late afternoon, I had a structure of cherry wood clamped to the bench, the beginning of a side table I'd been planning for months. The design worked out in a notebook I'd been sketching in since September. Simple mortise and tenon joinery, tapered legs, a small drawer with a wooden pull I was going to turn myself. Nothing complicated. Just the quiet work of making something out of nothing. I thought about Ed while I worked. I thought about my son and his wife in their new apartment, starting to build something of their own. A family, which is no small thing, which requires more than I want to hold against them. I thought about Carol's handwriting on those strips of painter's tape, which is gone now, and which I have to carry only in memory, which is where things go when they become permanent. I thought about something a student said to me once, a long time ago, in the middle of a lesson about the post-war period that had gone quiet in the way a class goes quiet when something has touched them in an unexpected place. She raised her hand and said, "Mr. Robert, was it hard to rebuild? After everything?" And I said, "I think rebuilding is the thing humans are most stubbornly good at. The hard part isn't starting over. The hard part is deciding that you're allowed to." I thought about that for the rest of the afternoon as the light moved across the garage floor, and the wood took shape under my hands, and the house around me settled into the particular quiet that is not loneliness. Not really, but solitude, which is a different thing entirely. Solitude is a room you've chosen to be in. Loneliness is a room someone else locked you inside. My door is not locked anymore. The side table took me 6 weeks to finish. It turned out better than I expected. I put it in the front hallway, just inside the door, where Carol used to leave her keys and her reading glasses and whatever book she was in the middle of. I set a small lamp on it, and a photograph of the two of us from 1994, standing on the deck of a rental cabin in the Smoky Mountains, squinting into the sun and laughing at something I no longer remember. My son came for dinner in February. Just him, without his wife, which I understood was partly an act of good faith and partly an acknowledgement that some fences needed to be mended in stages. We had pot roast, which was Carol's recipe, which I have only recently started making again because for a long time it was too much. We talked for 2 hours at the kitchen table. We talked about Ed, and about his new job, a real one. Full-time logistics again at a firm downtown, and about the baby, who was due in June, and was going to be a girl. At the end of the evening, he stopped in the hallway on his way out and looked at the side table. "Did you make that?" he asked. "Last month," I said. He ran his hand along the edge of the drawer the way I used to watch him touch things when he was small, carefully, like he was learning what something was made of. "It's beautiful," he said. I said, "Thank you." He said, "She would have loved it." He meant Carol. He was right. She would have found a reason to put flowers on it within 48 hours of it entering the house. I said, "I know." He left. I stood in the hallway for a moment after the door closed, in the quiet of my house, in the light of the lamp on my side table. Outside it was February in Ohio, which means the sky is gray and the world is doing the invisible work of preparing to be something else entirely in a few months. I'd done a bit of that invisible work myself this past year, mostly when nobody was watching. I poured a small glass of the bourbon I keep for company, and I sat in the kitchen, and I thought about 63 years of being Robert Stubborn, patient, slow to anger and slower to act, a man who taught history for 3 decades and somehow always believed that the past could instruct the present if you were willing to sit with it honestly. I thought, I am still allowed to take up space. I am still allowed to own what I have built. Kindness is not the same thing as surrender, and love is not the same thing as endless accommodation, and the door to my workshop is open because I chose to open it, not because someone decided it wasn't mine anymore. I took a sip of the bourbon and it was good. The baby is due in June. I've already started on a rocking chair.